In this video, we're going to talk about metric conversions, and in the next few slides, I'm going to be showing you the chart that they do give to you on the STAR test, and I'm going to show you how to use that chart or how to refer to that chart when you're solving your problems, and then we'll have some just general straight up conversions, and then the last few slides will actually look at the word problems. So here's part of that chart I was talking about that you're going to get on your STAR test. And as you can see, they're keeping it pretty simple for you. There's just base units, the kilo, the centa, and the milli is what you're going to have to apply towards some of your problems. And if you look over here onto the left side, those are going to be your bigger units. Right, big. And then over on the other side, these are the smaller units as compared to the ones on the left. To help with your conversions, if you're looking over here on, let's say for example, the kilometer to the meters. So you can see you have 1 kilometer that will equal 1,000 meters. So you just have to think about, if I want to change that kilometer to a regular meter, what would I have to do to it to get it to equal that? So you see here we have 1 kilometer, and in order for it to get to that 1,000, you would have to multiply that 1 times 1,000, and that would give you meters, or vice versa. If you had the 1,000 meters and you wanted to convert it to kilometers, well, what you would have to do would be to divide it by 1,000 to get down to the 1. Now, I'm going to show a little drawing, don't laugh at my drawing, to kind of help you remember with your conversions from bigger to smaller, smaller to bigger. So let's look at our stick person here. If we're going with a very large unit, such as kilometer, if you think about, you have the really big and then you're going to small, so if you imagine your arms spread out really big and then you bring them in and we're going to cross them over here, and you can see you would have to multiply when you went from a big unit to a smaller unit. So when you go from big to small, you multiply. Now let's look at it from the other direction. So if we are going to go from a small unit to a bigger unit, so imagine that you have your hands together, so we're going to be going from small to big, so imagine that your arms are widespread when you go from that small to the big. And if we look at this, see this line here, we can pretend our head is this dot and our belly is the other one, so we can see that is division. So when you go from small to big, you will divide. Alright, let's look at these example problems, and on this slide I'm only going to be dealing with the big to small units. So imagine again, of our illustration up here at the top, got your arms widespread, got big, we're going to go to small, our arms crossed, that means we're going to be multiplying. So if we look at our first one here, we have 5 kilometers, and it's going to equal how many meters? So you'll take your 5 and you're simply just going to multiply it by 1,000. Because it takes 1,000 meters to equal 1 kilometer. Therefore, if you have 5 kilometers, then that will equal 5,000. I'll put this here. Now, knowing a lot of the kids, or you may already know that sometimes when we multiply these things, that we're just adding those zeros onto it. So it's kind of like taking your 5, and if we imagine it with the decimal there, you're moving it over this 3 to the right. And so we have 5,000. The next problem, we are going to be converting 2 meters into centimeters. So if you look over here at your chart, you see that your meter to centimeters, that is 1 meter will equal 100 centimeters. So again, thinking from big to small, you're going to be multiplying. So we will do your 2, and we will multiply by 100, which would equal 2 200. Again, if we're looking at it and you want to think about it with the decimals, then you're moving it over the two things as you multiply to get those extra 2 zeros. Okay, next problem. We have the 14 centimeters and we're going to convert it to millimeters. So if you look over here at your chart, 1 centimeter equals 10. So you will have to multiply, again from bigger to smaller, you're going to multiply. So we will multiply 14 times 10, and that will equal 140. Again, if you want to think about it as moving the decimal point, you will just have to add on the other 0 and bring it here, and that gives you 140. Now you may be thinking, well, how do I know which direction to move that decimal point? Well, just remember when you are multiplying something, your product is going to become bigger, so you want to make sure you move your decimal point in the direction that will make your number bigger. Then finally, our last one. We're going to change 7 grams to milligrams. So let's use your chart over here. I'm going to come down and we'll see that right here the gram to 1,000 milligrams. So to convert that base unit of grams to milligrams, you're going to go from big to small, which means you're going to multiply. So you will just take your 7 and multiply it by 1,000, and that gives you 7,000 as your answer. If you want to look at it as moving decimal points, you'll see here we'll have to add on those 3 zeros and then move it over all those zeros. Remember, if you're multiplying, you want to make it bigger. So here we go. Now let's look at going the opposite direction. So if we're going to be looking at our smaller units and changing them into bigger units, as we see at our illustration here, we have the small and we go to the large, which means we're going to divide. So let's look at our first conversion of 6,000 grams equals how many kilograms. So again, we're going to look over here at our chart and we'll see that 1 kilogram equals 1,000 kilograms. So if we want to take that smaller unit of grams, 6,000 grams, and we want to change it to the kilograms, then we're going to divide it by the 1,000 here. And that'll give us an answer of 6. If we want to go back and you want to look at it as a decimal point, we'll do our 1,000 here. Let me get rid of the comma now so that won't confuse us. And if you think of your decimal here, well, we're going to have to move over those 3 places, those 3 zeros, and we're going to go to the left this time. Now, remember, again, how do I know which way to move the decimal? Well, with division, your quotient will become smaller. So we want to move the decimal to the left because that will make it smaller, and we'll move it those 3 places. And our answer here is 6. The next problem, we have 3,000 milliliters, and we're going to be changing it to liters. Milliliters is smaller than liters, so we will have to divide, and we're going to look over here. We're going to use the chart. It takes 1,000 milliliters to equal 1 liter. So we will take the 3,000 that we have, and since we're going to be moving to a bigger unit, we will divide by that 1,000 that we have here. And that gives us the answer of 3 liters is the same thing as 3,000 milliliters. Again, if we look at it with the decimal point, usually when we divide, the quotient becomes a smaller number, so you'll move that decimal point over those 3 places, and we know how many places because we're going to look at those zeros that we have there that we're dividing by, and they'll go right here. Then our last problem is 80 millimeters, and we're going to be changing to centimeters. So if you look over here at your chart, you can see that millimeters is smaller than centimeters, and 1 centimeter equals 10 millimeters. So if we're going to be moving from that small unit to a bigger unit, we are going to divide. So let's take 80, and this time we will divide by the 10 because our chart right here tells us. And that will give us an answer of 8. So 80 millimeters is equal to 8 centimeters. So again, if you want to look at it as decimals, this one's probably not as hard because you can do your 80 divided by 10 easily and quickly, but if you do want to look at it with the decimals, we have your imaginary or your invisible decimal there, and then that 0 shows us how many places. We're going to go to the left because we want the number to get smaller because of the quotient. Okay, so let's move on to some word problems. So we'll look at this first word problem here. A kitten weighs 500 grams, a puppy weighs 2 kilograms. Which weighs more and how much more? Now with this word problem, it doesn't tell you what you need to convert to. The questions don't ask you a certain measurement. So you can either convert your grams to kilograms or your kilograms to grams. Now, if you were taking a test and there was multiple choice, then you'd want to look at the answer choices to see how the answer choices, if they're listed as kilograms or grams, so that way you know which way to convert it. So let's change kilograms to grams on this one. So we're going to look at our chart here, over here to the side, and we have 1 kilogram equals 1,000 grams. Now remember, if we're going from that big measurement of kilograms to a smaller unit of grams, then we're going to be multiplying. So let's take your 2 kilograms and we're going to multiply it by 1,000. I know that because it's right here on the chart. It tells me 1,000. And that gives me 2,000, which would be 2,000 grams. So now we know that the puppy weighs 2,000 grams and the kitten weighs 500 grams. So now that they're in the same unit, we can compare them easily. So who weighs more? Looks like the dog in this question is going to be being the one who weighs the most. Now remember, in this one I have 2 questions, so I'm going to need 2 answers. So how much more? So if we're comparing, we know that that operation is going to be subtraction. So we will just take your 2,000 minus the 500, and we get 1,500 grams. So the dog weighs 1,500 grams more than the cat. Now let's go ahead and just look at it the other way in case when you do go to take a test and you have multiple choice and all the answer choices are listed in kilograms, so that would mean we would have to change the grams to the kilograms. So on this one, if we're going to be changing grams to kilogram, we're going to be going from that smaller unit to a bigger unit. So remember, when we go from that smaller unit to the bigger unit, we are going to be dividing. So let's take your 500 grams, and we're going to change it to kilograms. So if I'm looking at my chart here, I see the 1,000, which means I'm going to have to divide by 1,000. Now, don't freak out and go, I can't do 500 divided by 1,000. We'll go back and we'll look at those decimal point that we were talking about in earlier slides if you want to look at it that way. So we have that invisible decimal point at the end of every number. We don't necessarily put it there unless we need to put numbers behind the decimal point. And then we're going to look here. There's 3 zeros side. That means I want to move the decimal point 3 places. Now, if we're dividing, that means our number is going to get smaller. So we'll move it to the left so it'll make the number smaller. 1, 2, 3 places. So it will be equal to 0.5 kilograms. So in this case, the dog still weighs more because it's 2 kilograms, and that's bigger than 5/10 of a kilogram. And then if you just want to find the difference of how much more with that second question, we're going to do 2 minus the 0.5. Now this one I'm going to go ahead and add that implied or invisible decimal point and go ahead and put a 0. So that way when I'm subtracting, I can just line these up, bring straight down my decimal point, and subtract from there. We'll go ahead and we'll do the borrowing. 5 and 1. So the dog weighs 1 5/10 kilograms more. Alright, next word problem. I make 2 5/10 kilograms of popcorn and eat 750 grams of it while watching a movie. How much popcorn do I have left? So, before we can even answer this question, you have to notice here that You have grams and you have kilograms. Those aren't the same units, so we have to convert one of them. Again, here it doesn't ask which unit it wants as an answer, so you can do either way. Or if you have multiple choice, go ahead and look at those multiple choice answers and see what unit is listed so you know which one you need to convert to. So let's go ahead and just start with the 2.5 kilograms, or 2 5/10 kilograms, and let's change it to the grams. So remember, we're going from a bigger unit to a smaller unit, and I can just check my chart here, and we have the bigger unit over here on the left, and it's going to a smaller unit, so that means we're going to be multiplying. So if I look at my chart here, 1 kilogram is equal to 1,000 grams, so that means I'm going to be multiplying by 1,000. Now you can do it traditionally of how you would solve, multiply it out, count how many places are behind the decimal, and that would give you 2,500 grams. Or if you want to look at it with moving the decimal points, we see that we're going to have to move the decimal point 3 times each time to represent one of those zeros, and we're going to go ahead and move it to the right because when you multiply you want your product to become bigger. So let's move it 1, 2, 3, and then as you can see there we still get 2,500 or 2,500. So now that I've converted and I have them in the same unit, now I get to answer the question, how much popcorn do I have left? So if we started out with 2,500 grams of popcorn and you ate 750 grams, we'll subtract that out because you've ate something, so that means to take it away. And if you want to do it with showing your borrowing here, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Got a little carrying crazy here. So the 0, 10 minus 5 is 5. We'll have to borrow right here. That'll be 7. So I have 1,750 grams left of popcorn. Now I'm going to go ahead and just show you the opposite direction in case your answer choices are listed in kilograms. So what I'll need to do first is convert that 750 grams to kilograms so that they're in the same unit, so that then I can go ahead and do the math operation afterwards. So let's take 750 grams and we want to change that to kilograms. So again, if we look over here at our chart, we see the grams are smaller and we're going to be going to bigger. So smaller to bigger means we're going to divide. So 750 divided by, and we see here on the chart we need to divide it by 1,000. Now don't freak out on this, we'll just use our little decimal point trick here. The 750, there's that implied decimal at the end of numbers. We see 3 zeros, which means we're going to move 3 times, and this time to the left because when you divide you have a smaller number. So 1, 2, 3. So our answer here will be 0.75 kilograms. You can go ahead and add that 0 if you want to, but it's not necessary. So now I can actually solve the problem of finding out how much I had left. So I started with 2.5 kilograms. And I need to, let me erase this kilograms because I'm going to need some room there. And then I am going to be taking away the 0.75. Now remember with subtraction, you need to make sure your decimal points line up. So I can go ahead and just add this 0 here so that I have something to take away from. And I have 1.75 or 1 7/75 kilograms left. All right, last word problem I'm going to do with you. Aren't y'all having fun yet? This is so much fun. Okay, so George went to the store to buy soda for his Valentine's party. He bought 10 liters of soda, for Dan's party, he had 9,998 milliliters of soda. Who had more soda? So we're going to do a comparison here, but for right now we can't compare them because George's soda is listed in liters and Dan's is listed in milliliters, so we have to do a conversion. The same thing with the other problems. Doesn't matter which one you use unless it asks you what unit to have, or you look at your answer choices to see what units are down there. So let's go ahead and start with converting the 10 liters, and let's convert it to the milliliters. So we'll look over here at our chart, and as you can see, we have 1 liter to the 1,000 milliliter, or equals 1,000 milliliters. So we're going to be going from bigger unit to smaller unit. Now, do you all remember what you would have to do when you go from bigger to smaller? Did you say multiply? If you did, you'd be right. We're going to be multiplying. Now we see here on our chart, it has 1,000. Didn't mean to do that. We have 1,000 here, so that means we're going to be multiplying by 1,000. So 10 times 1,000. And that would give us 1. And then you all kind of know the trick here, adding those 4 zeros. So 10,000 milliliters. If you want to look at it with the decimal point, here's your implied or invisible decimal point there at the end of the number. When we multiply, we want a bigger number, so we see those 3 zeros here. That'll tell us how many ways to move. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And as you can see here, we have 10,000. So if it's asking who had more soda, we will see that George had 10,000 milliliters of soda, so Dan has 9,998 milliliters, so George has more. Now, just for fun, we can always say how much more, go ahead and go that extra mile, and we can probably do this mentally. George has two milliliters more of soda. So now let's look at it in the other direction. So let's say that you chose to convert your milliliters to liters. So we'll have Dan's 9,998 milliliters. And let's see how many liters that's going to use. So we'll look over here at our chart. And we have milliliters going to liters. So we're going from a smaller unit to bigger unit, which means we're going to do what? You guessed it, we're going to divide. So we'll take 9,998 and we're going to divide it by 1,000 because I'm looking here at my chart and it has 1,000 there, so I know to divide it by 1,000. Now, don't freak out on this, say, oh, I can't do this. Just do your decimal trick that we've been talking about. 9,998. I'm going ahead and removing that comma so it doesn't confuse me when I'm moving my decimal point. So there's my implied decimal point, and we're going to need to move 3 places because of the 3 zeros, and we know that we're going to move to the left because we want, when we divide, the quotient is a smaller number. So I'm going to go ahead and move this many. So we see that we have 9 and 998 thousandths of a liter. So when we compare that to, so when we compare that to George's liters, he has 10, and 10 is going to be a bigger amount than 9 and 998 thousandths of a liter. If you want to go ahead and do the math on that, we can just subtract those away. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this borrowing here. So we have the 0, can't take away an 8, so I'm going to come over here and borrow. That 0 doesn't have anything, so then I have to go to the next place to borrow. It's a 0, there's nothing there, so then I'm going to go to the next place and borrow, there's nothing there. And then finally I can borrow from this 1, which makes that 0. So now this is 10. Now I can take this 0 here and I can borrow from the 10 that I have, so that makes that 9, and this is going to be 10. Now this 0 can borrow from the 1 next to it, so that becomes 9, and this becomes 10. And now finally, where we originally started, this 0 here in the thousandths place can borrow. and we'll have 10 here. So it'd be 2, 0, 0, and 0. So George has 2 thousandths more of a liter than Dan does.